Hello, and thank you for joining. This is Tim Joseph, Bradmark Technologies Technical Support. And today we have a live webcast. Ed Stangler, our R&D manager, is going to be presenting about the latest 5.1 release, surveillance for Neo4j and web reporting and time slicing. So let's get started. Ed, are you there?
Thank you, Tim. First, I'd like to remind everybody about an upcoming webinar. We have the last webinar in our series, in our 5.1 series, which will be about how to migrate to Surveillance 5.1. That will be coming up on December 3rd. And that's going to be a great webinar where we're going to talk about the kinds of things that you might encounter if you're upgrading from a 4 system, and also some interesting things in general, even if you're coming into a brand new installation of 5.1. But for today, we're going to be talking about Neo4j at the beginning of this webinar, and then we'll be talking on the last half, we'll be talking about the web reporting and time slicing improvements that we put into Bradmark Surveillance 5.1, as well as a little bit of 4.8 as well. And then we'll wrap it up with some Q&A. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to briefly recap some of the essential items from Bradmark Surveillance for monitoring, especially if you haven't joined us in our previous webinar that we've had in this series. We have several major things that we do with Bradmark Surveillance. We do web monitoring, of course, for on-premises, cloud, and container databases. We have a lot of different metrics that we monitor to help keep the alerting going, to help keep the analysis going for database issues, as well as other types of issues as well. We have historical metrics, even if the database is offline. So if you want to do a post-mortem analysis of an issue that happened 3 o'clock yesterday or last week, we can do that with our recent history and our long-term history. We have reports for compliance. So if you have auditing requirements or you have other types of security requirements, we have things that help in those areas. And then, of course, we have a lot of unique metrics for more in-depth analysis depending on the database. Some of the most notable features in surveillance include time slicing, otherwise known as recent history. This is where you can go and find out what was the top SQL between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock yesterday, what was the top SQL by hour of the day, so you can see throughout the day what is the SQL that's taking up the most resources, those kinds of things. We also have flashback, where we can take the user interface, the same interface that we use for real time, we can take it back in time and see what was going on at 3 o'clock yesterday or 3 o'clock last week. And we also have web reporting, which is more for more long-term data, where you can see, for example, space usage over the last few months, those kinds of things. And then we have audit reports, as I mentioned before, where we can show SQL that's being run, bad logins, good logins, those kinds of things. We also have better security compliance in several areas than other products. We have encrypted TLS. We have a lot of other hardening items that are needed for things like PCI DSS. And we also have an alerts dashboard where we have the red, yellow, green status of alerts by server, by database, those kinds of things. So in 5.1, just to recap also from earlier in the webinar series, we have expanded into Nosql monitoring. Of course, we've been doing monitoring for relational databases for many years, but now with 5.1, we are expanding into NoSQL areas. And of course, there are a lot of different NoSQL areas to go into. But for each of them, we're covering the critical areas. We want to know what's running, what the details that you need for those type of items. We've been trying to find out what's slow in the past on this particular NoSQL database, space usage, we're looking for hot objects, change settings, all of the critical areas that you'd expect in a monitoring product for a NoSQL database. And we have all of our critical features that we had for relational databases for many years now. We brought that over to NoSQL, things like our alerting, where you can send different types of alerts, things like SNMP traps, run external scripts, those kinds of things. You can, of course, see the red, yellow, green status as well. We have uptime reports. We have the recent history for the top SQL. We have the flashback, and we have the long-term reporting as well. For NoSQL, of course, there's, if you've ever installed NoSQL items or any type of open source software, you know there can be a lot of dependencies, there can be a lot of issues getting it going. We've done whatever we can to help ease that setup. So we want to make sure we get up and running right away on the product. We have lightweight dependencies whenever, only the minimal required. We include dependencies, libraries, those kinds of things as much as possible to help you get running up and running fast. We have deep dive metrics as much as we can for the NoSQL system. There's some metrics that are really difficult to get in some of these areas. We saw in a previous series, we saw MongoDB. MongoDB is a very different kind of animal versus relational databases in terms of getting metrics. We did a lot in that area, and then we'll see in Neo4j, we actually dig down deep in order to get some of the metrics as well. We correlate a lot of this stuff and summarize this metric data to give you more meaning on this stuff, because a lot of it is kind of difficult to sift through. We make sure we try to summarize it, try to make it simple. And of course, we have the drill down information necessary to help really try to diagnose these issues on this NoSQL database. There are a lot of different categories in NoSQL. It's kind of a overall overarching term. There is one type of NoSQL database are document stores, like we saw with MongoDB. Graph databases are another type of area, and that's where Neo4j comes in. These are for doing things like when you're on an e-commerce site, for example, and you want to get a recommendation. Sometimes that's done with graph databases, and those kinds of things. And there's also key value stores like Redis and Memcache, and there are others as well. And I think as times go on, we'll be expanding into different areas as well, more areas of NoSQL for monitoring. Now, in Surveillance 5.1, as we've seen before, we introduced several new products. MongoDB is one area, Neo4j is another area. We've enhanced the set of web reports, and we'll see more of that a little later. And we've done 64-bit on Windows, as well as a lot of other enhancements, more minor enhancements that we've done to the product, just to make it easier to use, provide more stuff out of the box, and really make it a more complete experience for monitoring these type of databases. Okay, now we'll talk a little bit about another big item in 5.1, and also to some extent in 4.8, is the web reporting and time slicing enhancements in surveillance. In 4.8, of course, we saw earlier in the webinar series that we introduced the Postgres SQL module. We also introduced enhancements to recent history in 4.8. We've added some interesting things in terms of comparing SQL runtimes, searching SQL history, and adding more drill downs. So in 4.8, we have several new tabs in the top SQL views. The top SQL views already contain things like the full SQL text, the SQL plans. So there can be multiple plans for a particular SQL. We've seen in some databases we have session IDs as well. So now we've just basically extended this to have even more useful information. We have performance of the SQL over time. So we have in the form of graph showing things like the past week of performance of a particular SQL, especially now that we have a few new, well, we'll see in just a moment, but we have the performance of the SQL over time. We have comparison of SQL performance now versus like last week and those kinds of things. So before you could take the product and open up multiple tabs and look up the same item and see how it is last week versus this week. We made it a lot easier now, so it's much easier to see the performance now versus last week, and you don't have to do so much work to go find that kind of information. We also have, depending on the database, we also have new analytical columns like average, maximum, minimum. So as we'll see in a little while, we'll see on the Sybase side, for example, we have some new collection stuff that allows us to finally get a more accurate execution count, and with that, we're able to do the analytical columns like the average and the maximums and stuff like that. And then also, depending on the database, we have timed event statistics as well, and that's or wait statistics. Timed events, what we call wait statistics plus CPU time. So we also have that available, and then we also have other drill down details available, because one of the things that some of the feedback we've gotten from customers is that once they find something in top SQL, then they need to correlate that to actual sessions that are out there. So we've tried to provide more information to help you correlate that to the sessions and the applications that are running those particular SQL statements during that time window. Now, 4.8 also introduced full text search for recent history SQL for the local stores. So now, before you need the SQL to show up on the top SQL report in order to be able to click on it and see all the great things about it. Now, in 4.8, you can actually search the local repository of SQLs that are being stored, and then you can find that particular one. Ultimately, what we do internally is we have a SQL ID that we have. So ultimately, it's looking for the SQL ID, but you're able to full text search it, find the item you're interested in, and then when you click on it, you see all the great things that you see in the top SQL views. So things like the full SQL text, the SQL plans, more than one plan if there's available, the session IDs or the SPIDs in the case of Sybase, the performance over time, the new columns for performance over time, the comparison of performance versus last week, those kinds of things are all available now for any SQL that you find in there. So even if you don't know the particular range that it's taking up the most resources in, you can still look for it and then find that great information for it. So in addition to the recent history improvements, we've also enhanced the full suite of web reports. Of course, we've been providing web reports and PDF reports for a long time now for the long-term historical data, but now we've expanded that with new target audiences for reports. We have more coverage of reports. We have stronger reports, especially in auditing. We have reports for capacity planning and trending. That's pretty much adding a trending line to the graphs and adding some basic trending stuff that we're doing, and I think we'll be expanding on that in future releases to really have something really quite nice for that. And then we have SQL runtime comparison reports, which are basically the recent history kind of top SQL stuff, but expanded to the long-term history data in the central repository. The web reports are really, they work off of the long-term history, which we keep in a central repository database. The central repository database is a real database, like an ASE or a SQL Server or Oracle or something like that. Whereas opposed to the recent history, that data is more short-term history. That's the stuff that we keep in local flat files, what we call our stores. So that's the big difference between the two. And so now with the web reports, some of the things you could do for the recent history, you can now do for the long-term history, and that can span multiple databases as well. So for the target audiences, we have 3 audiences now in the web reporting. We have the DBA team, which most of our existing reports pretty much fall under the DBA team audience. So those are going to be all the nitty-gritty details, all the good stuff about the sessions, the SQL, all that stuff that's actionable. The management team is another audience where we have the more high-level items, the more management-related items for those kinds of reports. The security team is also an audience. Right now, we've moved the auditing reports into the security team audience. So that's primarily what that is, but we've also expanded that to have specific reports, as we'll see in a moment. And I think we'll be expanding that as time goes on as well. Now, for each of these audiences, separate logins to Bradmark Surveillance can be created thanks to the RBAC enhancements that we did a while back. You can create separate logins for each of the team members, and you can also then create team roles, and then you can assign privileges for that. So you can have, for example, the management team only have access to the management reports. You can have the security team be the only ones that have access to the auditing reports. Those kinds of things are possible with the role-based access control that we already have in the Bradmark Surveillance product. Now, for the security audience, we have stronger web reports. We've done a lot of enhancements in later 4.7, 4.8, and 5.1 to create better auditing reports for compliance auditing. So this is the auditing that's using the real auditing in the database. So, of course, there's the full-blown compliance auditing report where you can get auditing entries for all sorts of different types of events and types of things. And then there's also specific ones we've created. For example, we have one for bad logins. We have also for good logins as well. We have something for DDL commands, so anything that could change, modify data structure, the structures of the database. That's another report. We have support for huge audit reports. If you need thousands of pages of reports every week, no problem. For the PDF, for example. And we also have a lot of filter criteria you can add, so you can limit it to certain databases and certain users and different events and those kinds of things. So it's a lot that you can put in there to limit and to change the report. And of course, you can also copy this report and apply certain defaults as well, which is basically what the bad logins and the DDL commands, those kinds of things do. Is we take our main report and we just apply certain specific defaults to it. There's also operational auditing still under the security team, and the operational auditing is basically, it's based off of our recent statement type of collections. So it's not the official auditing in the database, but it's something that is good enough for a lot of purposes. And in fact, the operational auditing in some databases, the collection underneath that is very important for things that we're doing in other aspects as well. We'll see that with the Sybase product in just a few moments. So under management web reports, we have a lot of different things, but some areas of it include the database uptime and SLA report. We had that previously for individual databases in recent history. We have this as a web report, so you could do this over a lot of different things. Server uptime as well. So in terms of SLA reports, uptime reports in terms of databases or in terms of servers. We have reports for incident analysis. So if you have outages or you have other incidents, we have more of an analysis report for management. We also have several reports involving high-level items, high-level trends in user applications and databases. We have high-level items for activity trends. So this would be like the I/O and those kinds of things. And then we have other ones that are high-level things for resource usage, so space usage and other types of resource kind of trends would be another report that we have under the management team as well. Of course, in the DBA team, we have a lot more reports as well. Now, keep in mind, for typically under the DBA side, we have actually like two, 3, or 4 reports under each category, because we have a daily, we'll have an hourly, we may have a monthly, we may have a detail. So there's actually several different reports under each of these categories, but we've expanded the number of categories to include things like sessions. We have cache activity reports, transaction log reports, where that's important. We have device I/O reports as well. So this kind of helps round out the type of reports that we have in terms of the objects in the database. And then we have also the top SQL reports that you saw in the recent history. We have that for long-term history now. So this is the kind of thing that you can see. A lot of the things that we saw in top SQL, you can bring that across databases, well, for multiple databases, as well as for more longer-term history. We also have information on database activity, so basically activity by database, activity by users. We have activity by applications as well. And then depending on the type of database, we also have replication latency. So for example, SAP Replication Server, we have reports for replication latency on that. Okay, so I'll just briefly talk about some interesting things about the web reporting and the time slicing. Let me go ahead and bring up the demo for that. Okay, so before, just to talk a little bit more about the recent history side, going over, this is something that we've done for especially Sybase ASE users. Customers, we've enhanced the recent history in addition to all the other things that we mentioned earlier. We've also made some improvements in several databases in terms of the collection data. So, like until recently, we only had the sampling method for finding top SQL. Now we're able to take what we previously called our recent statement collection stuff, and we're able to synthesize that into a top SQL report very efficiently, and we're able to get some more interesting details in some areas. So for example, if I want to take a look at the top SQL, this is an ASC system. If I want to look in the last 3 hours of the top SQL, prior to this, I'd see things based off of sampling every certain number of seconds. Now I'm able to take a look at it at a much more with a much more detailed data, and capture things that are usually harder to capture. So if you have something that runs very quickly, for example, you can now capture pretty much everything now in the top SQL report on ASC. Now we've done this already for several other databases prior to recently, but now we've expanded this to SAP ASC and several other databases as well to really provide much more detailed information for certain systems that require that. If you have just the individual long-running queries that come in and they take a long time, then our traditional stuff has been fine. But if you have something that's been running very quickly, depending on how the pattern of it, this may give you better information for the recent history. We also have information summarized by database as well. So I can take a look at the same 3-hour period and see what was the most active databases in terms of SQL. And here I only have one database actually, but you can see here I can see the master database and the amount of time that was being spent on that, the number of execs and stuff like that. Actually, if I go back to the window we were just on, I did want to point out one more thing. Let me rerun this report again. And again, this is available for this is for recent history in 4.8, and then in 5.1, this is available for long-term history as well. So you can run it for different time periods as well. You can see here we have, in addition to seeing the elapsed time like we've seen in the normal recent history top SQL, we also have average elapsed time. So very similar to how you have the cache statements in ASE, or the way that we did procedure activity before. You can now get that for SQL in general. So you can see average elapsed time, the number of executions, those kinds of things. I think we have some other columns as well, but those kind of analytical columns are the things that we can calculate now that we have a much better idea of the number of executions in ASE, for example. And then, of course, we can also take a look at top SQL by hour as well. So I'll go ahead and take a look in 24 hours. What was the top SQL running during that time using the more granular data, finer granular data. And we can see here, be able to see, of course we can see this, we're going to have different types of areas. We have elapsed time, CPU time, wait time, logical reads, physical reads. This is on SAP ASE, so you can see a lot of different areas that you can look at. So I think I may have a little bit too much data there. Actually, I may have extended myself a little bit too much on that one. But we saw the type of query earlier about what that looks like in Neo4j. We have a similar kind of thing for ASE as well. So that's a little bit in terms of our recent history. Now we also have a lot of things that we've done in terms of compliance, and so I'm going to actually go back to an older version of surveillance to take a look at the kinds of things that we've done in the compliance area in terms of the security team reports. So this is the auditing kind of report, and you can see here, I'm just going to fill in a particular query here. You can see we have a lot of different filters, not the prettiest looking filters at the moment, but we got a lot of different filters in terms of databases, logins, event filtering, and that kind of stuff. And then you can run a report for a particular time period. So I'm going to go ahead and go back. This is a long-term history report, so I can go back to, for example, August. I'll do a report from August 1st to, let's say, August 3rd. And go ahead and run the report. So this is going against a real database to do the report. And we're filtering out certain types of databases like model and tempdb and master. This is from an ASE auditing set of data, type system procs. And you can see here we have the data. Now this is only about 3,000 rows, so it's kind of a small report. But you can see the kinds of auditing events that we're looking at. We can see different commands as well. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and search for update. So these are actually update statements that were executed, that we were auditing at the time. These are DML items. There's all sorts of great things about logins and DMLs and functions and lots of different stuff. And if it runs, you know, a few rows, or it does a lot of different rows, not a problem. And then we can click on this button right here to do a PDF, and that generates a PDF. I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. So here is the kind of PDF that we do. And this one here is only about 259 pages. So in this case, it's also kind of small report. You know, you can have thousands of pages, you can have a few pages. We have the filter criteria at the top, and then we can see here the kinds of things that we're auditing, built-in function usage. We have information on different objects being queried. I think we have some example of the SQL text as well. Yeah, right here. So here we can see the full SQL text for the auditing event. It's laid out a little bit nicer in the PDF version. So so if you have those kinds of auditing needs, we definitely have that available. And then we also have, just to review a little bit, if you haven't seen our web reporting in a while, we also have information in terms of other areas. Now this is an older version of surveillance, but you can see here we also have information like global information by day, and the global information as a whole encompasses several different statistics. It includes CPU utilization, includes disk I/O, it includes a lot of different areas. So we can take a look, for example, we can look at a daily set of daily data for, let's say, back in July. Let me go ahead and just make this a little bit bigger. Go back to July, for example, and let's say we'll do a period of maybe 15 days at the beginning of July and run this report. So now we're looking at global statistics for Sybase ASE by day. And I'll go ahead, and you can see here I can get CPU utilization, And now the green line is the average each day, and then the red line is the maximum. So you can see there's a little bit of variation, and then the blue is the minimum. And there's several different statistics we can take a look at. We have CPU utilization, we have disk I/O, not that interesting on that one. We have things like active locks, a little bit different there, and those kinds of things. Memory usage, packet errors, everything that we see in our global window for real-time monitoring is available through this web report. And then, of course, you can generate a PDF from that as well, and that looks like this. No, excuse me, it looks, I don't have that actually available. But we do have something similar in terms of database growth. So in database growth report, you can see here, this is also for a site-based ASC product. And you can see this is device-based usage. So we have the amount that's been allocated but not used, and then we have the amount that's actually used here. This is for a very short period of time. But we have this kind of information per database, for example, as well. Another type of report we have is the SLA reports. And this right here is a database uptime report that we generated for a particular 2-week period. And you can see we have a couple, mostly 100% uptime. We have one really bad one that's 0%, and then a couple that are almost okay at 98%. And these are the kinds of PDFs, the kind of web reports that you can generate from the product, from data that is a few weeks old, a few months old, a few years of data. You know, whatever you're able to store in the central database is not a problem for this. So that's a little bit about the web reporting and the time slicing enhancements, and a little bit of review about what that looks like in the product. Just to quickly mention a few other miscellaneous items that are going on in our 5.1 product, especially if you haven't joined us in the prior webinar series. We have 64-bit Windows now for the product. So if you are on Windows, there's some changes going on 64-bit. We move the files around, and there's other things regarding the client, but you know, nothing that's too difficult to get a hold of, and it really makes it a little bit more standardized in terms of the location of the product. And we also have just a quick note about HTML5. We actually do have an HTML5 client coming out very soon. It'll be actually in our 5.2 product, but we will make it available for earlier versions of surveillance. So if you're on 4.7.3 or later, we'll have an easy patch that'll be available. You just need to install it on the central alert server, or the CAS, if you have that, or whatever system you have the product on. And so you'll have that available very shortly. Some things, of course, any enhancements that we made in 4.8 or later won't be available with this patch, but for any functionality you do currently use, we'll have the HTML5 version available for that. And also in the current product, as it is right now, we have TLS 1.3 supported. So that's the latest and greatest in terms of TLS. So if you have those kind of security requirements, it's already in the product that is available in the 4.7 and later. Of course, you can try some of this yourself. If you haven't used the product before, we have a demo set up at this website. There's some activity on there generated every day. If you want to take a look at it through flashback or through real time, this is our 4.7 product, and this will be updated shortly with our 5.1 series. But you can take a look at it for yourself and try it out.